Okay, so today we're talking about the Boston Tea Party and some of the events leading up to it and things that happened afterwards. So in 1763, King George III needed to raise money after heavy losses in the French and Indian War and imposed hefty taxes on American colonies. On 22nd of March 1765, the Stamp Act was followed, and 2 years later, on 2nd of July 1767, by the Townshend Acts and Boston Massacre on 5th of March 1770, in which 5 civilians were killed by British soldiers. The colonists claimed that they were not obliged to pay the new tariffs because they had no representation in Britain. Parliament agreed and withdrew the taxes, but not the one imposed by on tea. By 1773, the British East India Company had large stocks of tea that they were unable to sell and were facing bankruptcy. The government came to the aid of the East India Company and exempted it from taxes that the Americans still had to pay. This allowed them to undersell the American tea sellers and create a monopoly. It was this reduction in tax and the consequent cheap British tea that precipitated the Boston Tea Party. 3/4 of tea was sold in America was smuggled into the country. When the first shipments of tea had arrived in New York and Philadelphia, the Americans refused to allow the ships to dock. 3 ships did manage to dock in Boston with the help of armed British vessels. 1 ship captain agreed to return to England but was prevented from doing so by the authorities. On the evening of December 16th, 3 groups of 50 men had the self-proclaimed Sons of Liberty marched down to Griffin's Wharf and boarded the 3 ships. By 9 p.m. they had broken open 342 crates of tea and dumped the contents into the Boston Harbour. A bit of the aftermath was, after destroying the tea, the men washed and tidied up after themselves, and the next day sent a man to repair a padlock that had been broken. It was then noted that large amounts of tea were floating on the water, and to prevent it being recovered, several small boats were rowed out and the tea hit with oars and paddles until it was waterlogged. So paddling it down. When the Bostonians refused to pay for the tea they had ruined, the British closed the port. They also introduced a restraining act in 1774, which led to the American Revolution. However, not everyone was enamored of the Tea Party. George Washington thought it would incur serious retaliations, and Benjamin Franklin believed that the partygoers should reimburse the East India Company for their lost tea. I don't think so. If you're going to get ripped off, stuff them, I say. But yeah, so it's the Boston Tea Party. It's a bit of a quick one. I'll soon do a deep dive actually, because I want to elaborate more on that. But we'll let you know how it goes later on. Stay safe. Have a good one.